The Huiyong Merchant Guild, greatest guild in the Central Plains, was reduced to ashes tonight. This was not caused by friction with another merchant guild. The demonic cult did this. The guild master sat defeated. Amidst the flames and gold, a masked man looked down at him and said, "You have quite a strong sense of justice. However, you are a merchant, not a martial artist, and the guild master of the Huiyong Merchant Guild at that." The masked man stepped closer to a small wooden box. He said, "Why don't you just hand over the key and make things easy for yourself?" Chung Hyun glared at his captor and asked, "Do I look like some idiot who would fall for sweet talk? No, seeing as you thought that. You demonic cult bastards are the idiots." He smirked and continued, "Do you think I don't know? You can't kill me without the key? Why don't you try cutting the box open with your arts? I can't guarantee what will happen to the contents if you do." The cultist leaned in and said, "I will ask you one more time, where is the key?" A purple light flashed as the cultist used his technique. Chung Hyun gasped in terror. "My mouth is moving on its own." He could not stop himself. Underneath the guild master's chair, the masked man raised a key and said, "I found it. To control a person's body like this, they truly are the demonic cult, but it is too early to give up everything just yet." Chung Hyun leaned against the wall and said, "What are you waiting for now that you have the key? Open it." The masked man held the small box and replied, "This key, there is a specific way to use it." Chung Hyun smirked and said, "Well, why don't you poke around a bit more? Are you giving up already?" The masked man's eyes glowed with a crimson light. "Open it." Chung Hyun stared blankly and replied, "Understood." That damn martial arts alliance leader. He took the key in the box. His hands trembled as he prepared to unlock it. He said it was safe because of its special contraption, but it is completely useless against someone using sorcery. What the hell is this thing? For him to dump it on me? Just what exactly is this thing? Chung Hyun opened the wooden box. "Let's take a look at it." "An elixir? You burned down my entire guild. Looking for just a single elixir pill?" A blade pressed against his neck. The masked man said, "If you have any last words, I will hear them." Chung Hyun stared at the glowing pill and asked, "How much to spare my life?" The masked man held a blade to the merchant's throat and said, "The followers of our cult do not covet wealth. Are you done speaking? Thanks for helping me make up my mind." The merchant smirked and said, "I cannot just die and be the only one taking a loss, can I?" He bit down on a glowing bead. "Whether it is a favor or a grudge, I always repay my debts. That is my way." Of the merchant, the masked man swung his sword and shouted, "You crazy bastard! How dare you defy the judgment of the cult?" A scream echoed through the quiet temple grounds. Mook Hwayung bolted upright, clutching his throat and said, My neck, is it still attached?" He stared at his hands. How? My neck was definitely." A man holding a staff approached and said, "Hey." Mook Hwayung turned his head toward the voice. Chung Hyun looked down and said, "How can someone on the Daoist path be slacking off like this? Wait, this person is Daoist Master Chung Hyun of the Wudang sect? Yes, it is me, you rascal." He shouted and struck Mook Hwayung with a staff. "Get a grip and get up already. What the hell is going on? It has been over 30 years since I was a secular disciple of the Wudang sect. I remember Master Chung Hyun being my teacher, even though I was expelled shortly after. Why is he standing right here, looking exactly as he did back then?" Mook Hwayung stared at the glowing object. "Even if I accept everything else, what in the world is this?" A golden bamboo slip floated in the air, listing prices for heavenly bones and talent. "It looks like an ordinary bamboo slip." Chung Hyun opened the door and said, "Stop slacking off and come out here." Mook Hwayung watched the old man leave. "It seems I am the only one who can see this. If so, is this bamboo slip the only clue to my current situation? I need to read it carefully again." Talent for the sword. Martial bone. There are grades and prices too. Does this mean I can buy these things with money? But what is with these prices? With 300 silver taels, you could buy 900 paiyong of land. Besides, clairvoyance is a divine power, said to be possessed by the Buddha. The prices, the items, it is all completely absurd. Agile movement 9th grade, price 3 copper coins. Beginner discount. Mook Hwayung looked up and said, "Master, let me ask you one thing." Chung Hyun replied, "What is it this time?" Mook Hwayung smiled and asked, "Could you lend me 3 copper coins?" A loud shout echoed through the temple courtyard. Mook Hwayung sat outside, chewing on a blade of grass. A few days passed since then. Mook Hwayung sat alone, accepting the fact that I returned to the past. Did they say the name was the divine demon pill? To send a person 30 years into the past, it really possessed a power fitting of its name. However, one thing remains unclear: why the alliance leader gave such an item to me? But wait a minute, if I think about it, shouldn't I just avoid receiving the pill later? Without that elixir, those demonic cult bastards would have no reason to attack me. I shouldn't bother getting involved with the Murim. I'll just live purely as a merchant. Plus, I even have knowledge of the future. I can become an even greater merchant than before. John Osu approached and said, So this is where you were slacking off? Aren't you going to train your martial arts? Today is the secular disciples evaluation. Mook Hwa-young looked at him. This guy's name was definitely John Osu, wasn't it? The son of the Wuhan Bank family. Mook Hwa-young fiddled with a blade of grass. Even if we do well, there's no way we'd become inner disciples anyway. Besides, he looked at the other disciples. Does that look like martial arts training to you? One disciple shouted, "Oh, throwing some punches." Another yelled, "This is Tai Chi." If that's Tai Chi, then the three disasters martial arts from the streets would be a supreme martial art. John Osu sat down and asked, "Anyway, what are these grass flutes?" Mook Hwa-young replied, "Ah, these? I'm going to sell them to the inner disciples." He put a flute in his mouth. To be honest, martial arts is just an excuse for us, and we're really just here to build connections. But they're ascetic deists, even if they're young, right? Especially the current generation, with the Myung character in their names. They are just kids, who learn nothing but martial arts. They would go crazy for a grass flute like this. John Osu smiled and said, "You have quite a knack for business, don't you?" Mook Hwa-young sat on the ground. This guy becomes the master of the Wuhan Bank in the future. In my previous life, I was kicked out too soon to have a connection with him. John Osu played the flute unnecessarily well. He is definitely not a bad person to get close to. He stopped playing and said, "You are good with your hands. I will buy one as well." Mook Hwa-young replied, "That will be 3 copper coins." John Osu waved his hand and said, "I am heading off first. Sell a lot." Mook Hwa-young watched him leave. "Alright, I have got the money now. How exactly do I use this bamboo slip? Seeing as the divine demon pill exists, I should be able to use this in reality too. Agile movement. Buy. Purchase. Use." Mook Hwa-young watched the gold item vanish into thin air. Whoa, that startled me. Did the purchase go through just from me wanting to buy it? He tested the thin string between his fingers. "I do not feel much of a difference right now though." A sudden scream echoed through the courtyard. Mook Hwa-young turned toward the noise. John Osu stood before 2 disciples and said, "How dare you call those pathetic punches Tai Chi? I should break both of your arms." The older disciple clutched his chest and replied, "You wet behind the ears brats." John Osu stepped forward and said, "Alright, let's see you try to break them." The inner disciple grabbed John Osu by the arm and asked, "Why are you so fast? Did a mere secular disciple actually think you could beat an inner disciple?" He tightened his grip. "Should I just snap your arm like this?" "Excuse me." Mook Hwa-young stepped forward and interrupted the confrontation. He gave a polite greeting. "I am a secular disciple named Mook Hwa-young. Why don't you let go of my friend first before we talk?" John Osu looked up. "Did you come all the way here just to say that?" A voice shouted, "We can talk plenty after I break this arm." Mook Hwa-young looked back at the panicked John Osu and said, "To be honest, I do not really care what you do to this guy. It is just, I happen to have a great product on me." He smirked and asked, "How about it? Would you like to take a look before you decide?" Chang Yewei stopped walking and asked, "Who is it?" He looked out over the temple grounds, where a strange melody drifted through the air. Mook Hwa-young sat by the roof, playing a leaf between his fingers. It is hard to play as well as John Osu, but this should be enough. A group of young disciples watched, with wide eyes and curious faces. Myong Jae-yong cleared his throat and said, "Ahem." He stepped forward and continued, "I am called Myong Jae-yong. Could we try playing that?" Mook Hwa-young pulled the leaf away and said, "Why are you acting like this? You should know better. Once it touches your lips, it becomes used and loses its value." Myong Jae-yong paused and replied, "Is that so? I suppose it would." Then, Mook Hwa-young held up a blade of grass and said, "But this demonstration grass flute is different. It originally costs 5 copper niang, but since it is a floor model, I will sell it for a bargain." The young disciples gasped in awe. Mook Hwa-young held up 3 fingers and said, "How about just 3 copper niang?" The boys looked down at their empty hands. Why is the reaction like this? It is different from what I expected. Mook Hwa-young raised his voice and said, "I am feeling generous. If you buy them in sets of 5, I will apply a special discount." Myong Jae-yong looked away and said, "Excuse me, the thing is, I do not usually carry money around." He lowered his head and asked, "Could I perhaps buy it on credit? Or how about taking something else in exchange?" Another disciple sobbed, "You cannot even play a grass flute, because you do not have 3 copper niang." Myong Jae-yong trembled and said, "If that does not work then, I suppose kids who only swing swords in this remote mountain would not have money." Mook Hwa-young sighed. "Honestly, I never intended to take their pocket money anyway. My real goal is to establish ties with the main sect disciples, who will eventually rise to power. Teasing them over money is enough for now." Mook Hwa-young said, "Well, I will just give you one." Myong Jae-yong asked, "Really? It is an honor for me if I am offering it to the main sect disciples of the Wudang clan." Myong Jae-yong said, "You know how to show proper respect, then I will gratefully accept it." This kid named Myong Jae-yong was a renowned master of the Wudang clan. In my past life, was his epithet. The invincible Taiji sword? Barring any unforeseen events, he will become the same master. In this life, if I can get acquainted with someone like that, this is definitely a profitable trade. A blade suddenly flashed and pressed against his neck. Chang Yiwei drew his sword and asked, "Who the hell are you?" Chang Yiwei glared and said, "Who are you to bewitch our disciples with trivial tricks?" Based on his uniform, he must be from the Chang generation like Chang Haiyan, likely the teacher of these main sect kids. Martial artists are always so quick to resort to threats of force. Look at that. The kids next to him got scared for no reason. Why do they consider everything except martial arts to be vulgar? Mu Kuai-young sighed and said, "Is enjoying a little music such a crime?" Chang Yiwei narrowed his eyes. "What did you say?" Mu Kuai-young stepped forward. "There is an old saying, what wavers is your eyes? It is the hand pulling the bowstring. It is the mind doubting whether it will hit the mark." Mu Kuai-young said, "The target is always at the same distance. Even if this is a trick, as you say, master, shouldn't it be no big deal if you know the truth?" Chang Yiwei looked down and said, "How insolent. Can I consider that remark an insult to the rules of the Wudang clan?" Blue energy erupted from his body, surrounding the courtyard in a cold pressure. Mu Kuai-young braced himself, using inner chi so cowardly. "But this is just to scare me. No matter how reckless the Wudang clan gets, they wouldn't kill someone over something like this. If so," Mu Kuai-young shouted, "even if the wind blows, how can a tree block its path? I will only move forward. I can only pray that I will not be broken." Chang Yiwei laughed and said, "You have some decent spirit, kid, to think you would still speak firmly against my aura subjugation." Aura subjugation? No wonder my stomach felt like it was turning over. Chang Yiwei reached into his robe. "Right, a grass flute can be a suitable form of entertainment. I will buy them all. So how much is the total?" Mu Kuai-young replied, "There are 15 in total, so it will be 75 copper niang." Chang Yiwei asked, "Did you not say there is a discount if I buy them in sets of 5? The special discount only applies to minors." Mu Kuai-young grinned and said, "Don't tell me, a master of the Wudang clan would pay a children's price, right? What an absurd brat." Chang Yiwei handed over a slip and said, "Here is a 100 niang slip from the infinite battlefield. Keep the change. Consider it compensation for threatening you." Mu Kuai-young looked at the paper. 25 niang for having my life tested. Not bad. My Yong Jai Yong asked, "Come to think of it, what is your name?" "I am Mu Kuai-young," he replied. He looked at the master and asked, "May I perhaps know your deist name?" Chang Yiwei smiled and said, "It seems you really didn't know who I was. I am Chang Yiwei, the limitless divine sword, a top master of the Wudang clan, and a future titan among the 8 venerables." This guy was that incredible person? Mu Kuai-young bowed deeply and said, "It is an honor to meet you, senior limitless divine sword. If I had known that, I wouldn't have talked back." Chang Yiwei looked down at him and asked, "Do you understand now exactly who you were acting so insolently toward?" Mu Kuai-young replied, "I do, but just as Wudang has its way, a merchant has the way of a merchant." Chang Yiwei smirked and said, "Insolent brat." Chang Yiwei smiled and said, "You just won't let me have the last word." Mu Kuai-young exhaled, trying to catch his breath. Se Gonghyun walked forward and said, "To flap your gums like that, in front of the limitless divine sword, that is impressive. Just when I thought I had passed one hurdle, now that guy is popping up?" Se Gonghyun laughed and said, "I am Se Gonghyun, of the Ascending Thunder sect. Let's get along all right. He is currently the worst scum among the lay disciples, and before my regression, he was the very reason I was expelled from the Wudang clan." Se Gonghyun rubbed his chin and asked, "Did you say your name is Mu Kuai-young? I heard a child of the Supreme King became a secular disciple of Wudang, and I thought that was you." Mu Kuai-young shook his head and said, "No way. I come from an ordinary farming family." "What a pity," Se Gonghyun shouted. "With a background like that, how will you survive in this harsh world?" "Well, it can't be helped. I have no choice but to be your friend. Before I regressed, I took that hand. Since I had neither talent nor backing, I just thought the opportunity of a lifetime had arrived. That is until that incident happened." Chang Yiwei held up a small pouch and shouted, "We found these in the secular disciple dormitories." A pile of books fell onto the cloth. A disciple whispered, "Those are the things Se Gonghyun was looking at, aren't they?" Mu Kuai-young looked at the books. He absolutely refused to lend them to me. Serves him right. Chang Yiwei pointed at the pile and asked, "Do you know whose quarters these were found in?" "It was yours, Mu Kuai-young." He widened his eyes and asked, "What, me?" Chang Yiwei shouted, "To think you would dare bring such vulgar things to the sacred Mount Wudang." Mu Kuai-young shook his head. "And no, these aren't mine." Chang Yiwei shouted, "No excuses. As of today, you are expelled." Mu Kuai-young stood frozen. After enjoying them all by himself, he pins all the blame on me. He clenched his fist. "Back then, I was struggling just to make ends meet, so revenge was out of the question. But," Mu Kuai-young slapped the hand of Se Gonghyun away. He glared down and said, "Bullsh*t. Things are different now." Mu Huaiyang looked at the bald man and said, "Does playing king make you feel good? Just because you learned a little martial arts? Is being the son of some sect leader, or a government rank? It makes me sick watching you act tough. Please grow up, you baldy." Se Gonghyun stepped forward and replied, "I thought you were just good with words, but it turns out you were just a crazy fool with a death wish." Mu Huaiyang leaned in and asked, "What are you gonna hit me at this rate? Want to just duke it out and get kicked out together?" Se Gonghyun glared and said, "You better watch your back." He turned and walked away. Mu Huaiyang watched him leave. What a shame. I would not have minded fighting right here and getting expelled. In my past life it happened a month later, but I need to get out of here so I can put my memories to good use. If not, I guess I will have to try something. At the secular disciple evaluation, a disciple called out, "Mu Huaiyang, what the hell is with you? What are you gonna do if you go up against Se Gonghyun?" He shrugged and replied, "It is a random matchup anyway, isn't it? I will cross that bridge when I come to it." The disciple sighed, "You are more optimistic than I thought." "It is not that I am optimistic, it is because I know exactly who my opponent will be. According to my memories, from before the regression, my opponent was one of Se Gonghyun's lackeys. The result was a crushing defeat for someone like me, with neither talent nor physical strength. As long as nothing unexpected happens, it should go the exact same way in this life. As long as nothing unexpected happens, that is." Disciples traded blows in the courtyard. As the evaluation began, the elder watched the arena and said, "It has already begun." Chang Yewei approached the table. The elder looked up and asked, "Senior brother Chang Yewei, what brings you here?" Chang Yewei smiled and replied, "Didn't you ask me to come check out the secular disciples first?" The elder sighed, "I definitely did suggest that, but there really aren't any disciples worth your attention," Chang Yewei said. The elder looked at him. "Didn't you say the sparring matchups were random?" "They are," Chang Yewei replied, "but I've been appropriately tweaking them along the way." Mu Huaiyang stood nearby, eating snacks with a friend. He seemed completely unconcerned. He watched the crowd. "Then mind if I fiddle with the next matchup?" The elder nodded. "Sure, I suppose. Do as you please." The elder stood up and shouted to the crowd, "I will now announce the next matchup. First, Mu Huaiyang." The young man froze as his name echoed through the courtyard. Mu Huaiyang waved and said, "I will be right back." He walked toward the arena. His opponent is Se Gonghyun. The bald man loomed over him. "What? Se Gonghyun? Why so suddenly?" He looked toward the stands. "Chang Yewei, that guy must have changed the bracket." The referee shouted, "If both of you are ready, the spar will begin." My chance came sooner than I thought. Se Gonghyun lunged forward and yelled, "You little b*****, I told you to watch your back, didn't I?" He grabbed the young man and slammed him down. This wasn't part of the plan. Well, whatever. The goal of knocking him down a peg is still the same. Mu Huaiyang gripped the stone tightly in his fist. He lunged forward and said, "Eat this." The projectile struck Se Gonghyun directly in the face. Se Gonghyun clutched his nose and screamed, "Uwaik." Mu Huaiyang smirked as he closed the distance. And following up with the three disasters martial arts, he delivered a powerful strike to the bald man's jaw. Just one hit would be a shame, so have another. He swung his fist again, driving the blow home. "Ha, but my body feels somewhat light." Mu Huaiyang struck twice and landed on the ground. "I got too excited and hit him twice before I knew it, but..." Se Gonghyun gritted his teeth and said, "F***ck, you be ****, I am going to kill you. Now, what should I do with this guy?" Mu Huaiyang struck. Blinding dust exploded against the face of Se Gonghyun. "That move." Chang Yewei clenched his fist and said, "How dare he use dirty tricks like the unorthodox faction?" The woman placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Let us watch a little longer. It seems he has a plan." Mu Huaiyang crouched low to the ground. Se Gonghyun roared and slammed his foot down, shattering the stone floor. He missed his target as the dust settled between them. Mu Huaiyang dodged the strike and countered with a heavy blow to the face of Se Gonghyun. "This is a strange sensation. The three talents fist I only learned on the surface is flowing out naturally." Se Gonghyun gritted his teeth and let out a pained groan. "The only thing different from my past life is the fact that I bought agile movements." Se Gonghyun roared and swung his arm wildly. "Just that one thing changed me this suddenly?" Mu Huaiyang leaned back, easily avoiding the desperate attack. Mu Huaiyang slammed his fist into the opponent's face. "This is completely broken. To think I could get this strong just by having money." Se Gonghyun collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. "I don't have time for this. I need to get out there and make some money right now." Se Gonghyun wiped his mouth and stood up. "You little b*****, I will kill you. I swear." His aura has changed. Is he going to use internal energy? Se Gonghyun lunged forward with a roar. "Die!" Mu Huaiyang blocked the strike, but the force pushed him back. Is this the difference in internal energy? His speed and power, they have both increased. He stepped back until his heel hit the edge. I have nowhere left to retreat. Can I really not beat this guy? Se-gong-hyun swung a heavy fist at the dodging opponent. Let alone internal energy. With me only dabbling in the three talents fist, there is no way. Chang Yewei stepped between them and shouted, "Stop!" He forced both men back. With a single motion, Chang Yewei gripped his sword and looked at Se-gong-hyun. Using internal energy against a martial arts beginner? Do you not realize this is something even the unorthodox faction wouldn't do? Se-gong-hyun stammered, but he's the one who threw a sandbag first. Chang Yewei looked at Mook Hwa-young and replied, "That is also true." He narrowed his eyes. To think a disciple of Wudang would resort to the tricks of a street thug. The elder looked at the boy and said, "I will hand down an appropriate punishment, so wait here." Mook Hwa-young lowered his head and replied, "Understood." The elder announced to the hall, "With that we will conclude the secular disciple evaluation. Awesome, all of today's goals have been achieved. I landed a hit on Se-gong-hyun and created an excuse to get kicked out. Everything is going exactly as planned. Should I start brainstorming business ideas for when I leave?" The elder looked at Chang Yewei and asked, "Are you okay?" Chang Yewei stared into the distance and replied, "Why wouldn't I be?" The elder frowned and said, "First of all, we need to kick that kid out." Se-gong-hyun only used internal energy by mistake in his anger. But that punk is a scumbag who prepared a sandbag from the start. Chang Yewei remained silent, watching the night sky. Chang Yewei asked, "Did you see the kid movements? Junior brother? Didn't you say it has been only a few days since he learned the three talents fist?" Mook Hwa-young has not learned any other martial arts, yet he showed flawless movements. Doesn't that mean the child possesses tremendous martial talent? The junior brother replied, "Even so, Wudang rules are strict, so he must be punished." Chang Yewei smiled and asked, "What should we give him?" The junior brother looked at Mook Hwa-young and said, "You will serve in the sect Gokjaeon Pavilion for now. This is Master Chang Yewei deep consideration, so you should be grateful." The man walked away and said, "Why didn't senior brother kick him out?" Mook Hwa-young watched him leave. "They aren't kicking me out? In my past life, they kicked me out for looking at spring pictures. Why are they acting like this now? This puts a dent in my plans." A fellow disciple approached and said, "Isn't it a relief? At least you weren't kicked out. You seem to have some martial talent too. Why not work harder to become an inner disciple?" "Martial talent, my foot. I have zero talent for martial arts. After becoming a merchant in my past life, I tried to learn, but I had no talent for physical movement. I failed to master a single art properly. Yesterday's miracle was all thanks to the bamboo slip I named the martial talent shop." Mook Hwa-young looked down and said, "Well, anyway." Mook Hwa-young walked away and said, "I am going to head to the Gokjaeon Pavilion now." The man waved and replied, "All right, take care of yourself. Getting kicked out early is already a lost cause." Without knowing any Lightfoot techniques, did this pavilion handle Wudang finances? I might as well skim some profits off the top. I suppose I thought about this too simply. Mook Hwa-young looked at the man before him and asked, "Was Master Chang Yewei an elder of the Gokjaeon Pavilion?" Chang Yewei smiled and said, "I belong to the Gungdo Pavilion, but as senior works here. More importantly, you will be working as a messenger here." Mook Hwa-young asked, "A messenger?" Chang Yewei replied, "This pavilion exchanges financial documents with all the other pavilions. You will have to deliver those documents to each one. The furthest place takes over 4 hours from here. If I take this on without Lightfoot techniques, Wudang will be paralyzed." Chang Yewei looked at him and said, "Don't worry too much. You are just an extra hand." Chang Yewei looked at the young man and said, "Since meeting like this is fate, I will teach you the geography of Mount Wudang today. Follow me." He turned to see the boy frozen. "Mook Hwa-young, I am F***ed. There are over 10 pavilions on Mount Wudang. Some are in ridiculous locations that require climbing rock walls. I do not want to end this precious second life with a futile death from falling. So what is the conclusion?" Mook Hwa-young crept toward the door and slipped out into the night. A midnight escape is the only answer. Mook Hwa-young stood outside the gates. "I just stepped out of the lodging. Why is it so dark? It would be nice to buy something from the Mujay shop. Dark adaptation rank 9, price 80 niang." He looked at the paper in his hand. "The voucher Chang Yewei gave me. Of all things, they do not accept vouchers. At this point there is no other choice." He lit a torch from the brazier. "I have no choice but to force my way through." He ran down the stone steps. "I will definitely be easily spotted because of the torch, but I still do not want to end my second life with a futile accidental death. Besides, Mount Wudang is huge. There is no way I will get caught that quickly, right?" He smirked as he moved through the rocks, but stopped when he saw someone ahead. "I got caught." Immediately at that, Chang Yewei pointed his sword and asked, "Who are you?" Mook Hwa-young raised his hands. I am just an ordinary herb gatherer. I fell asleep while gathering herbs, and before I knew it, it had become night." Chang Yewei lowered his blade and said, "A herb gatherer who falls asleep while picking herbs. That is a first. It is true. Take a look at the herbs I gathered. Mu Kuai-Yung held out a handful of leaves. Zhang Yewei looked at the grass and asked, "Are these even herbs?" The guard replied, "How would I know? I just grabbed any random grass, just in case, and it is actually working. There is no way these guys know anything about herbs." The guard whispered, "What if he is not a herb gatherer?" Zhang Yewei looked at the path and said, "Even if he is not, what else can we do?" "Well, it should be fine. Be careful on your way down." Mu Kuai-Yung took the torch and said, "Thank you. Nice. I got past the guards, so getting down the mountain should be quick. If I just get past there." He sprinted down the stone steps. "No one can stop me now." A voice called out, "Kuai-Yung." Mu Kuai-Yung froze, holding his torch high. The voice asked, "Where are you hurrying off to?" "That damn familiar voices. Don't tell me." Zhang Yewei stepped into the light and said, "Did you think I wouldn't know? You wanted to leave the sect?" Mu Kuai-Yung gasped, "You again, Zhang Yewei?" He looked at the man and asked, "How did you know?" Zhang Yewei replied, "Did you think so little of a martial artist's size? A person's face contains all 7 emotions and desires, muscles that move unconsciously. Do not lie." Mu Kuai-Yung asked, "What do you intend to do with me?" Zhang Yewei looked at him. "Before that, there is something I wish to hear." Zhang Yewei stood by the gate and said, "Even in the Central Plains, countless people wish to enter Wudang, so why do you wish to leave?" Mu Kuai-Yung looked away and replied, "Isn't the test to become an official secular disciple, to spar against one of the third-generation disciples and win? If you fail that test, it is all for nothing. I know myself best. I don't have the talent to grow like that." Zhang Yewei looked at him and asked, "You haven't even tried yet, have you?" "It is just that I am a hopeless case," Mu Kuai-Yung replied. Zhang Yewei smiled and said, "Even though I can see through all your lies, speak honestly. I won't tell anyone what I hear today." Zhang Yewei looked at the boy and said, "Your talent is quite outstanding, so why are you trying to leave Wudang?" Mu Kuai-Yung clutched his forehead. "I cannot confess my talent comes from the Mujie shop." He looked up and said, "Then I will speak honestly. The Wudang sect is not a vessel that can contain me. Whatever, just go for it." "Did I just cross the line?" Zhang Yewei stepped closer and asked, "Are you alright?" Mu Kuai-Yung laughed nervously. "Ah yes, I understand very well what you mean." "Really? Then will you let me go like this?" Zhang Yewei smiled and replied, "No, as someone of the Wudang sect, I cannot stand by after hearing that." Zhang Yewei drew his blade and said, "I will show you the true essence of Wudang." Blue energy swirled around the steel, creating a powerful vortex. Mu Kuai-Yung shielded his eyes. The wind suddenly, "No, this is." The pressure forced him back. As the courtyard trembled, Zhang Yewei pointed his sword and said, "Watch carefully." Zhang Yewei moved with fluid grace, his blade trailing blue light. "It is beautiful, as gentle as a flowing river." Mu Kuai-Yung watched the display. "This is the true secret of Wudang's footwork." The sword hummed in his grip, circling with endless momentum, and like the center of the sea, it is unceasing. He leaped through the air, striking with sudden intensity, yet as fierce as when it passes through a gorge. Zhang Yewei stood under the moon, wielding the Taiji wisdom sword. As blue energy swirled around his blade, he looked at his opponent and asked, "Do you understand now?" Mu Kuai-Yung stared back at the Wudang master. He replied, "There is just one thing I am wondering." Zhang Yewei asked, "What do you mean?" "Wudang sect. So what exactly am I supposed to do with that?"